Brian T. City Ortega, a record of 16 wins, 5 losses, and 1 no contest. The California kid who made his name on the regional scene before taking the UFC by storm with his slick jiu-jitsu and signature triangle choke. Hence the nickname T-City, shortened from Triangle City, given to him by his coach Renner Gracie at the age of 15. Through his career, Ortega would become the only person with 3 consecutive third-round finishes, earning himself a name for always being in the fight and having a chance to win it at any moment. While it was his jiu-jitsu that had his opponents concerned, Ortega proved he had the stand-up to back up his ground game, earning TKO victories over Thiago Tavares, Clay Guida, and Frankie Edgar. Yet, despite all these successes, there seemed to be a common theme throughout the Californian's career. Fighting at featherweight, Ortega seemed to always put his body through the most, and these struggles with weight may have hindered the future career of T-City. How's it going, Oaks? Welcome back to the Fight Scene YouTube channel, and today we're going to be doing a little narration video talking about all the weight struggles of Brian Ortega with light of all the recent events. So without further ado, let's just jump straight in. So Brian Ortega would eventually get his shot at a UFC debut after his original debut bout was cancelled due to Diego Brandao pulling out. He would get his debut against Mike De La Torre, a bout in which Ortega would win via first round submission, which was a standing rear naked choke. However, a post-fight screening would show that Ortega tested positive for the steroid drostanolone. If you don't know what drostanolone is, its primary function is to reduce water retention and promote a dry vascular look. So if that isn't evidence that Ortega was struggling with weight from his literal debut, I don't know what was. Anyways, he would be suspended for about 9 months and fined $2,500, something like that. He would then manage to get his weight struggles under control and go on a pretty good run where he would get his 3 consecutive third round finishes against Tavares, Brando, and Clay Guida. But then he had another struggle coming into the Renato Moicano fight. This was a big bout in featherweight with number 8 and number 7th ranked going at each other. However, leading up to the fight on weigh-in day, Ortega weighed in just 2 minutes before the deadline, meaning he had to take the entire day to cut weight, and he only just made it in time. He did weigh in at the limit, but that must have been a tiresome weight cut, and he really must have drained his body there.
I really want to see what happens when this fight goes to the later rounds. Ortega was the last one to weigh in. He came in almost 2 minutes before the weigh-in deadline. So was that a hard cut, or was he just waiting to weigh in? We're not sure, but that type of stuff usually plays dividends in the third round.
Fortunately, it didn't seem to affect his bout too much with Moicano, as he managed to get the finish in round 3 after a back and forth war. He then seemed to have it under control as he went throughout the rest of his career and his fights, earning his title shot against Holloway, where he got beaten to a pulp, unfortunately. Then he put on a good performance against the Korean Zombie, had a firefight with Volk where he almost finished him, but ultimately also got beaten to a pulp there. Then he did his shoulder injury against Yair. Then he eventually had the rematch with Yair, and he was getting pieced up on the feet, but once he got it to the ground, in round 2, he dominated it, and then round 3, he got the finish. It was then in the June of 2024 when things started to take another dip for Brian Ortega. He was scheduled to fight Diego Lopez on June 29th of 2024 at UFC 303, if I'm not mistaken. However, on fight day, Brian Ortega would pull out. He would pull out after having a seriously tough weight cut. It says in the headlines that he pulls out against Diego Lopez due to illness and weight cutting issues. Ortega himself said he experienced severe physical and mental distress, where he even had an inability to leave his bed. So seriously, how bad does a weight cut have to be to do that to you? And yet at this point, Ortega was still not thinking, let me maybe move up to lightweight. Anyways, he gets rebooked against Diego Lopez in September of 2024. He makes weight, he gets into the fight at UFC Noche, and he looks absolutely nowhere. Lopez beat the brakes off him for 3 rounds, knocked him knocked him out, then woke him back up. I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about when I say that with Lopez. But all round, he looked tired. He looked nowhere. He looked like a shell of his former self. And then, ladies and gentlemen, that takes us into this weekend's most recent events. Now, Brian Ortega is 34 years old. He's not exactly old. He's maybe a little bit out of his prime. But at 34 years old, you should still be fighting at a relatively high standard. I mean, you look at a lot of these guys in the UFC and they can still get it done up until they're 40. So, different for everyone, but even so. But this weekend at UFC Shanghai, Brian Ortega faints during his weight cut. On the day of weigh-ins, Ortega faints. He has to go to hospital. He's not looking good. Nothing is looking good about this fight. Yet, somehow, I presume because he was in China, because I think America would not have let him keep on fighting. But anyways, they decide, no, it's fine. We'll move it to a catchweight bout. 153 pounds is what Ortega eventually weighs in at. And you are telling me this guy still doesn't think he should move up to lightweight. But anyways, weighs in at 153. Aljo weighs in the same. And then they go on and fight a 5-rounder. And Ortega looks absolutely ass. I think he was trying to save himself for the later rounds. He was trying to pace himself for a 5-round fight. It should have never been a 5-round fight, first of all. Ortega never looked like he was going to have the gas to go 5 rounds, especially after a weight cut that's so bad you faint. Yeah, I really not sure what went on there. But that is what it brings us to. Current events is Ortega missing weight against Aljo and having to fight at a catchweight bout. And I don't understand how he's had all these issues throughout his entire career and not once has he decided to move up to lightweight. He literally had to use a drug. He had to use steroids to make weight for his debut, his first fight in the UFC. And not once did he think, let me move up to lightweight. I will never understand it. And I think you look back at a lot of his fights where he got beaten up against Holloway, against Volk, things like that. And you've got to think, how much of a factor was his weight cut? Because everyone knows a draining weight cut can really mess with your stamina, with your fatigue. It can really hinder your performance in the octagon. And I think there's so many times we've seen Ortega in that octagon recently and even back in the day where he has not looked his best. He has not looked as dangerous as he could. And you've got to think, is it all these weight cuts that he's been putting himself through for all these years and he never thought to move up to lightweight? I don't know. That's just my 2 cents on it. This was a little narration video, first time trying it out. So you guys must let me know what you think. If you enjoy the videos like this, I'll try to keep them coming. There's no UFC this weekend, so going to try put together some cool YouTube videos to post. But yeah, let me know what you guys think of this. That was the rundown of Ortega and his weight issues in his UFC career. Yeah, as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll check you in the next one.